my pleasure to turn over to Eithne Treanor. She's the managing director at Treanor Media, and she's joining us from our studio in the UAE. She's going to be anchoring our programs throughout this morning on Eastern Standard Time, and she's going to pick up where we left off on this conversation on the energy transition by focusing first on corporate net zero targets and how to make them a reality. Eithne, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you so, Margaret. Thank you so much. And that was a fascinating opening there, talking about Asia and seeing what's going on there. Of course, so much focus on Asia in terms of what's happening now, what needs to happen, and the plans for the future. So well done. That was really, really interesting. So thank you so much. And we're going to now look directly and see what's going on here on the net zero pledges from vision to reality. We have a lot to cover here. Of course, when we look back on 2020, we really saw a rapid series of net zero pledges from governments, from countries, from companies, and I think tremendous focus. And we've seen at many of the conferences throughout the year, virtual conferences though they may be, but we've seen tremendous commitment. And also we've seen some action taken by companies. So it's very, very encouraging, because I think in the years up to now, we had probably a lot of talk, which was very good. It was very intentional. It was very directed. But I really think in the last year or so, seen actually a lot of tremendous action. So these pledges now really have to be taken from vision to reality. And this is what we're going to be looking at in this panel, where we're really going to examine what we can do and indeed what has happened, what companies have done. Just to all of you out there, I want to welcome everybody, of course, and also to remind you that we do want you to be involved. Please do send us your questions through the app. Is probably the best way to engage with us, because the app has very dynamic facilities there, and you can network throughout the day, but definitely send us some questions through the app. So stay engaged with us throughout the day. And here for this session, net zero pledges from vision to reality. Let me introduce to you our esteemed panel. We have a diverse panel who can really put it into perspective exactly what has been done for the last while. So quickly, I'd like to introduce to you from Repsol. We have the Deputy CEO and Executive MD of Energy Transition, Sustainability and Technology. Louis Cabra joins us now. Louis, thank you so much for being with us. From Siemens Energy, we have Tim Holt. He is a member of the Executive Board and Labour Director. So it's lovely to have you with us, Tim. From the Deputy Commission for International Affairs from the Agency of Natural Resources and Energy from the Ministry of Economy in Japan, we have Shinichi KIHARA. So lovely to see you too. It's great to have you on board and see what's going on in Japan. John Pearson joins us from Petrofac. He is the Chief Operating Officer and Chief Corporate Development Officer. And we also have Andreas Schierenbeck from Uniper, the CEO. So Andreas, great to see you as well. So we have everybody on board. I'm delighted to have you back. Let me start, if I would, with you, Louis. And when we look at the pledge that Repsol has put in place, and this was a pledge you put in place back in 2019, really your commitment to net zero by 2050. Talk to us a little bit more about, and indeed, how do you build on that credibility when we look at the long-term goal, and what are you going to do to make sure that you get there?
Thank you, Eithne. It's a very good question, because 2050 is far in time. So a long-term pledge needs to be built on something which is in between, and how you are going to do it. So basically what we have done in a very practical terms is to put a decarbonization pathway towards the net zero with interim targets. So we have targets specific for 2025, 2030, 2040, moving ahead towards the net zero. Again, it's difficult for the stakeholder to understand what decarbonization means. If I say by 2030 is going to be 25% decarbonization, I need to explain how we are going to do that in terms of business strategy, business decisions. So what we do is to engage very clearly with our stakeholders and explain to them how we are going to proceed. And the levers we have are a direct results of our vision of the future of energy. So electrification with renewables will be a driver for decarbonization. Second, we are convinced that low carbon liquids and gases, fuels, will be there also to complete the scene, and also that we are going to need carbon capture, use and storage, because it's not going to be enough. There will be always residual emissions that need to be captured from the point of emission of the atmosphere. So we have set specific targets within our energy portfolio, starting from oil and gas and moving towards building something like 15 gigawatts of electricity generation in 2030 in our portfolio, wind and solar. We are going to triple our production of biofuels. We are going to have more than 1 gigawatt of hydrogen production for use at our refineries, integrating renewable hydrogen with biofuels with our conventional fuels. And we are going to deploy carbon capture and storage in our projects. The first one will be in Indonesia. So definitely a very clear target, very clearly expressed, and very transparently communicated to our stakeholders. Maybe that could be my first point of introduction, and I would be happy to detail a little bit more as we speak.
Absolutely, thank you, Luis. And some very ambitious plans in place there, but already, as I said before, we're beginning to see some great action happening, and Repsol leading the way there. Thank you so much. We will indeed come back to talk to many of those, and perhaps you can share some examples in terms of how they're working with us. Tim, if I can come to you, and when we look at the energy transition that without a doubt is underway, but also it's not going to happen overnight. So talk to us about getting to those net zero goals, but also perhaps the concept that I think the general population also needs to understand, that when we talk about the energy transition, that is very much what it is. This is, we're going to be doing this for probably a while, and what needs to be done step by step.
Yeah, thank you, Eithne. I mean, you're right. It's certainly something that we really also track closely. We see a lot of, net zero pledges from companies and, our customers. So it's important to see where the strategy of our customers goes. We have to, provide the products and solutions. And, but we also look at it because we cannot shift overnight. This is really, as you said, step by step. And, it's going to be a gradual process. And why is it that way? I think, we really have to look at every region, every company differently, because there's a different starting point. And the way we look at it, we classified also what we call regional archetypes, because they face different challenges. They are the, energy hungry region, India, Brazil, China, comes to mind, where it's really all about, satisfying growing energy demand, energy must be available. We have low carbon leaders. I think, Germany, UK, really good, where it's all about, sustainable energy. So that's really the main focus. We get energy exporters. Russia comes in, where it's really about using the resources. And then we have very traditional companies, Poland, Mexico, where it's all about, affordable energy. So it shows you a bit the mix and what we're facing in terms of providing the right products and solutions. So it's all about, how do we go and find tailored solution and do it step by step. It can range from modernizing infrastructure. We take existing assets and improve the efficiency, reduce CO2, not completely eliminate it, but reduce. So that's one, but also then, use interim solutions to get there. Hybrid plants comes to mind. We still use fossil fuels, but you couple it with battery storage, for example, and then you go all the way to, CO-free to, energy production, use renewables, and so on. So as you can see, it's a bit a mix how we do it. But I think, for us, it's important we push the innovation on all these fronts and not just one, because, the challenges everybody faces is a bit different starting point. And, when we look at it, it's not just, energy generation, it's mobility, it's the industrial sectors. And then it really comes to, we have to look at sector coupling. How do all the sectors interact with each other? And that's probably a topic we're also going to talk about in this panel.
Indeed, and it's a very complex discussion. The discussion is complex, but for you, the actual operators who are rolling this out, I mean, you have so many moving parts and so much dynamism to actually keep on track of all the time. And I know with Siemens really looking at different regions, and you have some great plans in place, but we'll talk a little bit more about that. Thank you so much. Let's move over to, and we just heard there at the opening session about what's been going on in Asia. And I'm really delighted now, of course, Shinichi KIHARA joins me now here too, and talking about particularly what's happening in Japan. I know it's a bit of a wide question, but when we look at the the Agency for Natural Resources, it sits within the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, where it needs to sit, obviously, because it's feeding out to not just consumers, but actually keeping the economy going. But how will the government of Japan actually achieve the net zero targets?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Treanor. And hello, everybody. I'm very happy to participate in this Global Energy Forum. And I thank UAE government and the Atlantic Council. Yes, talking about the carbon neutral. Yes, I agree to what my colleague just has said. Different country has different strategy because they have different condition. So today, more than 120 countries have made pledges towards carbon neutral by mid-century. And I'll simply explain about the case of Japan. In Japan, the carbon neutral by 2050 is the highest priority policy of the Prime Minister Suga's administration now. And since the announcement in October, there's a bipartisan support from the politicians. And surprisingly, all industry sectors are supporting the direction. And why is that? First, the carbon neutral goal is revolutionary change of approach in Japanese energy/environment policy. This is a move from a classical bottom-up or incremental approach to backcast approach. Under the bottom-up approach, policymakers and industries tend to make conservative steps and decisions. On the contrary, under backcast approach, with clear and ambitious long-term goal, everybody needs to make big jump to fill the gap. So you need technology innovation and unconventional policies and business models to make it happen. And second, the carbon neutral goal is not understood as the enemy to economy. It is Japan's new growth strategy. Carbon neutrality will lead to future corporate profits, creating a positive cycle of the economic growth and environmental protection. So as this session's title says, we are now refining the statement into actions in Japan. In December, very recently, our ministry launched the extensive green growth strategy. The strategy highlights 14 key technologies in energy, transport, and manufacturing, home and office. For example, hydrogen, storage battery, offshore wind, carbon recycle, and ammonia fuel, and others. So for each sector, the strategy specifies the current status, challenges, and future actions. So the strategy also includes support measures, including 2 trillion yen Green Innovation Fund, taxation, regulation, and standardization, mobilizing private finance in order to facilitate entities that make challenges towards ambitious targets. So Japan is now ready to move the vision into reality, and I'm very happy to discuss further in this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I love what you say there too, talking about unconventional business models. And I think not just in the private sector do we need to see that actually, but it's great to hear that coming from government as well, that they're actually looking wider and looking outside, what sometimes can be rather maybe blinkered approach to this. So that's very, very encouraging to hear. Thank you so much. And of course, we will come back more on that. John Pearson from Petrofac, let's have a look at what's making a lot of this possible too. And it really, I would think, is the implementation and I suppose the acceleration of digitalization. This really has made a lot of difference, but also not just in terms of net zero, but I think in terms, talk to us about efficiency, because I think, you talk about how efficiency has made such a big difference in this too. John.
Thanks, Eithne. And look, I speak as a humble Scots engineer who likes a simple plan and keeping life straightforward. And I'm very encouraged that all three previous speakers have stressed the need for a practical plan, because you don't get from where you are to where you want to be without a plan that's got tangible steps in it. And I echo that absolutely. And in that plan, one of the most immediate things that we can all do is address efficiency. Like all the other companies, we're working on CCUS, on hydrogen, solar, even direct air capture. But in chronology, one thing that we must all not forget about is efficiency. And digital has revolutionized everything else so much that it would be amazing if digital didn't have a huge part to play in this. And in our experience, it does. And we haven't got time or space to go into all the ways that can touch the things that we all do. But with this lens of efficiency, and I would remember back to the early days where people used to have to explain that good safety is good business, I would echo that net zero and energy efficiency is also good business. This is not just a cost. It is a phenomenal opportunity for all of us, and it's a net positive as well as a net zero. So, one little example of that, my own business, we're an energy supply contractor and a producer in small part. We've turned our business around in the last couple of years based on digital. You look at how you live your own life, we recognized that we had a massive thing that we could gain in our business context. One little example, we've been working with others on predictive analytics. It's not new news, but it's very powerful. And we have the ability now to look at plant and tell what's going to break before it breaks, which funnily enough is a much cheaper, more efficient way of sorting out that outage. And in a net zero context, we can do the same thing. We can analyze consumption patterns. We can look at where we use more, perhaps leak more, where we're less than efficient, and we can predict those things ahead of them happening, which is, it's better for safety, it's better for efficiency, it costs less, and it's maybe not the largest overall contribution, but it's a very immediate and very tangible step along this road. And I think we as a closing thought, Eithne, before I pass back, we all need to authentically bridge the rhetoric gap with our staff. We need to show them tangible, practical actions that, whilst I'm sure they believe we're working on the medium and longer term, I think they find it very, very engaging to be involved with and see practical near-term action. And we found that some of these efficiency and emissions reduction type measures fit very neatly into that category. Thank you.
And I know that's something you're very passionate about, and we'll come back and we'll talk about that specifically, because it is something that I think all of the companies, you have to have that buy-in from everybody. It's not just about leading from the top. It really is about getting everybody in place. We'll come back on that one for sure. Andreas, talk to me about, when we look at any company, any hydrocarbon company, and when we look at the motivation, I suppose, in terms of making sure that you're looking at putting those objectives in place. And I know you put some net zero objectives in place last year too. Talk to me about that motivation. Is it just because it's, the right thing to do? Is it good business? Give me a feel for what the motivation is.
Yeah, thanks, Eithne, for the question. I think Uniper is a kind of special case in that meaning, because yes, we have roots which are going down nearly 100 years, being an energy business, trading and generation of energy. On the other hand, Uniper is a rather young company. It was created 2016 as a spun-off from a big German future, high carbon, into one company and set it free and put it on the stock exchange. So actually we got two choices: to accept that we're looking at a deteriorating business and we are going out of business over time, or we accept our fate to create our own strategy and use what we have to steer it, to run our business and accept the environment, which means we have to go for decarbonization. And actually, after we accepted that, we found out that actually we are not so bad positioned to run a decarbonization strategy. We closed old plants, we focused on stepping out of lignite, we have a plan to step out of hard coal. We are switching to gas, LNG and natural gas, and we're looking how to decarbonize that further with our partners like Siemens Energy and GE, what we can do with our assets going into the future. Of course, this is not only a technical thing, it has to be run as a business. We have to create profits. We have to have a sustainable business model, which helps from one side. On the other hand, if you're switching off, you have to switch something on. And of course, I think that what John already mentioned, we have to look at our people as well. Traditionally, if you started your career in a generation station, coal-fired, normally you would retire as a worker before the station was retired. This is now changing. So we have a couple of thousand people which are affected by that, and we have to show them what is the way forward, what we are doing with these assets, how we continue to show them a future, how we maintain that. And that was actually the reason we put up a plan which is tangible, which you can achieve, where you can say, yes, it's a stretch, there's something where we wish for at the end, but it's a kind of stepwise approach year by year what we are doing. It's digestible, it's acceptable, and it creates a path for a sustainable future. And I think that has worked out for us very well.
Thank you so much indeed. It is. It's about having that plan in place, and I think all of you have certainly done that. One area I'd like to talk about, and Louise, if you could perhaps kick this off, and I know many of you will have something to say about this too, is the introduction to hydrogen. And will hydrogen be, part of will it ultimately be the solution? It's certainly something everybody is talking about. Many people are working on it at the moment. And you talked about, using hydrogen at the refineries, Louise. Bring us up to date in terms of how you're, finding that shift that maybe will happen. And again, the different types of hydrogen that are there. Ultimately, we're all looking for green hydrogen, I guess, but we have to do that transition in the meantime. What do you think?
Well, definitely hydrogen will be one of the drivers of decarbonization, but we have an open view about the bunch of technologies, the bunch of levers that we are going to use to decarbonize. So we see hydrogen as one of them, together with electric vehicle, with decarbonization of our, let's say, oil and gas through carbon capture. Specifically to hydrogen, what we see, and always there is always a balance between short-term and long-term. The long-term view of hydrogen is very promising, and we may think on fuel cells, wide distribution of hydrogen, new infrastructure, etc. This is going to be long-term. But if we want hydrogen to be happening in the short term, we need to see which are today's uses of hydrogen that is produced from natural gas with carbon emissions, and how you can substitute that. The perfect example to us for our portfolio is the refineries. The refineries are one of the highest hydrogen consumers in the industrial sector. So we are substituting progressively the hydrogen obtained from natural gas from hydrogen obtained from renewable energy. And this hydrogen will be straightly incorporated into our liquid fuels. So you don't need new infrastructure, you don't need new car technologies, and from day one, you can be decarbonizing. There is always a balance between short-term objectives and long-term, and I believe the right balance is making use of technologies to address both short and long.
Now, Tim, there's obviously you're doing some work and doing some very practical work. And even here in Abu Dhabi, congratulations for Siemens on the work that's been done in hydrogen. So very, very exciting plans in place to, you have a long history at the company. And when we look at, I suppose, the evolution over the years, particularly in energy, where do you see hydrogen positioned for Siemens?
Yeah, thank you. And it's interesting, like, nowadays, I mean, it always feels you open a mainstream newspaper, there's always an article on hydrogen on it. So, and, if I look back a year and a half ago, when we looked at our portfolio, hydrogen was more towards the, corporate research for us that have been long in the energy industry. Well, you always talked about hydrogen, but it was more, covered by, the research. This has really changed over the last, 12, 18 months. It's accelerating. It's on the forefront. And I think now it's really all about how do we get it up to an industrial scale, right? It's a lot of pilots. You mentioned the MOU we signed in UAE. There's a second one. It's really about establishing, a hydrogen economy in the UAE. We signed a similar agreement down in Chile together with Porsche, where we use wind power to produce hydrogen to then convert the hydrogen into, syn fuels, to power cars. So, a lot of collaboration going on, but it's really now about, you can do so many pilots, but at one point you need to scale it up. The industry, the technology is there. the cost equation isn't completely there. And I think we all have to work on this to, get it up to an industrial scale, find the application that are, economically feasible, and then really scale it up. So, we see a very bright future. It reminds me a bit about, wind in the early stages, PV in the early stages, where you go from, it's a long shot to accelerating quickly. And I find that really exciting. But it's quite a bit of road ahead until we see this full hydrogen economy throughout the value chains.
Exactly. I think that's where it does sound like we are at the minute in it. It's the the buzz around it, but it now is about actually making that a reality and making sure that the investment is there. And indeed, people like yourself and companies like yours really taking that extra leap, so to speak, and actually doing something. And we'll be very excited. Everybody will be watching to see how this works, because once it gets moving, I think then that momentum is created and really there is no stopping for it. Shinichi, talk to us in terms of what's happening in Japan and how you look at hydrogen technology in terms of the the carbon neutrality goals of the country.
Yes. Thank you. From policy point of view, the hydrogen is also very hot very recently. And Japan has taken lead to develop hydrogen society as key technology towards carbon neutrality. Our government launched the basic hydrogen strategy back in 2017. That was when people were less interested yet then, but following our roadmap, many countries, including US, EU, France, Germany, many countries now launch their roadmaps, and many others are following now. So I can say the world is getting into full swing of hydrogen society. The challenges are on demand side, scaling up the hydrogen use in mobility, industry, and power generation, but also developing hydrogen supply chain is very important. Here I highlight two technologies that Japan is leading and will play a crucial role in the future global hydrogen society. The first one is Japan aims to build stable and affordable global hydrogen supply chain towards 2030. Producing hydrogen domestically through renewable power plus electrolysis is not enough to meet massive power demand in Japan and perhaps in other countries as well. So we intend to import large amount of hydrogen from overseas. The world's first liquefied hydrogen carrier ship will start transportation test of liquefied hydrogen from Australia to Japan early this year. The hydrogen will be produced from lignite, and the CO2 will be injected in CCS facility in Australia. So we take out hydrogen and leave the CO2 in the upstream. And in Japan, we do not differentiate green hydrogen or blue hydrogen. They are all important. Hydrogen is clean, no color. Hydrogen from natural gas or coal with CCS will be key technology that will transform fossil fuel producer into hydrogen producer. And the challenge is the cost, just like we rightly said by my previous speakers. By scaling up hydrogen supply to 300,000 tons in case of Japan, we aim to reduce the cost to $3 per kilogram, 1/3 from today. And that makes the hydrogen competitive towards the gas power plant. And second technology, I introduce hydrogen thermal power generation because it will be the game changer in terms of the volume of CO2 abatement. In Netherlands, the Mitsubishi Power will provide 440 megawatt gas turbine for hydrogen power generation, aiming to realize the world's first 100% hydrogen thermal power generation by 2025. Single full hydrogen plant of this size can create a hydrogen demand equivalent to 400,000 fuel cell vehicles, or the heat demand of 200,000 homes, and might therefore provide an opportunity to create a hub for other potential hydrogen users. Once the technology challenge and the cost issue is overcome by scale merit, we will have wonderful option of carbon-free thermal plant. It's thermal plant, but carbon-free. This is a very attractive option for achieving energy security and in environmentally friendly manner. So these are the things, what's happening in Japan and we're promoting right now. Thank you very much.
And indeed, so much happening there, and great to hear again about that liquefied hydrogen coming from, you know, Australia to Japan, and the elements too, as you say, making it cost competitive, absolutely essential. Andreas, when we look at what Uniper is doing, you know, stepping out of coal, the natural gas decarbonization, and again, making sure that hydrogen is part of that mix. I suppose this is all part and parcel of that energy transition, whereby companies really have to be looking at what suits best when, and, you know, making sure the transition happens at the right time. Talk to me about what you're doing when it comes to hydrogen.
Well, actually, hydrogen is not completely new for us. Interestingly, we looked already 2012 in Germany in hydrolysis, and we're producing the first hydrogen with a scale of more than 1 megawatt. It was at this time kind of revolutionary. 2015, we started with artificial methanization on that side. So actually, we know the mechanics very well. And that's why we, of course, betting strongly on hydrogen as well. I think if you're looking at decarbonization, which is the ultimate question, it can only happen with more electrical energy, with electrification, and hydrogen for the remaining processes you cannot decarbonize with electricity. Our assets from a coal point of view cannot be converted, but our gas assets, as we have checked, can at least take partly hydrogen or 100% hydrogen. And that's why we're looking with our partners, what can we do to really do that transition. On the other hand, I can only enforce what Tim said and Shinichi said. From Tim's side, the costs have to come down. The whole thing will only work if we are getting the cost down from the economics, because they are too high at the moment. And I really appreciate what Shinichi said, that in Japan, hydrogen doesn't have any color. This is in other parts of the world a little bit different. We have a highly emotional discussion about the colors of hydrogen. And if you ask me, emotionally, I think we're adding every couple of weeks a new color, which is probably not helpful, because I really appreciate what Shinichi said. Hydrogen is hydrogen. It is CO2 free as long as it's produced without CO2. And it doesn't matter if it's come from natural gas, from LNG, from lignite, from coal, or whatever. We just have to make sure that the CO2 impact with the generation is definitely low enough that it makes sense. Because actually we have a kind of chicken and egg problem. We have too high costs, we have low demand, which is normally translating into high production costs. On the other hand, with high production costs, we don't get demand. So we have to find the right regulations, the right framework to actually do both, bringing the cost down and creating the demand, that we can transportation and production cost into a balance to really ramp it up. And then we can discuss later in 2030 or 40 about the right color of hydrogen, or what is the most efficient production of hydrogen. I think we have not the luxury to wait and having probably too much ideological discussions. We should look at the ultimate goal and focus on what we want to achieve.
Well, and I welcome this very realistic discussion too, because I think I've probably spent too many conversations at conferences deciding and talking to people about what color hydrogen should be and the focus on one or the other. And as you say, sometimes that's absolutely delaying what we can do, whereby, yes, get on with it and create the hydrogen that we can do right now, and it will probably find its natural position. It will emerge. So I enjoy that. Thank you so much for raising those points to both to you and Shinichi as well. Thank you very much for that. John, when we look at meeting the net zero targets, I mean, are we looking in the short term at, I suppose, a combination of different fuels? That transition is going to happen when it happens, but one or the other at the moment is probably not the chosen way. Is it just a matter of just taking time to evolve and see what works best?
Yes, is a short answer, but this is a transition. People always seem to forget it's an energy transition. And in our zeal for the new, we kind of sometimes focus on the end state and fail to recognize what we need to do in the meantime and how it's going to be delivered. And hydrogen is a great example. I was nodding strongly to both Tim and Andreas's comments there that this, we kind of know the path. We've all done grey for years. And if you told me a couple of years ago that this was going to sneak out of the laboratory and into the mainstream quite as fast as it did, I probably would have disagreed with you, and I would have argued with you if you would tell me that I would be working on both blue hydrogen with CCUS and green hydrogen with solar. I just wouldn't have kind of believed you. But to your point, we need to transition in a managed way from where we are to where we want to be, and that needs, and maybe it's a point that might lead us somewhere else, that needs a coordination between industry and government and policy. And if you look at the UK as just one example just now, and you know, it's great to hear that lots of other governments are absolutely on this case equally, if not more. You know, you deliver policy objectives through real projects. To get real projects done, companies like those on the call have to be able to take an investment decision. To take that investment decision, you need an investable project, which needs a range of things. It needs costs to come down, but in the meantime, it needs an element of policy support or certainty to get these jobs moving. And each of our technology chains and streams, they're all the same. Hydrogen is, you know, do we know everything about the outer ends of green hydrogen? Not yet. Is that what is holding us back from negotiating the transition? No, it's not actually. It is this matter of giving FID confidence to those who have to put their money in at scale that we will have a business model that will deliver. And you know, I'm a supply chain company rather than more of an energy company. We are massively encouraged by the whole transition. It's not a threat, it's a huge opportunity, as previous speakers have said. My one worry in all of this is that the downtick of the conventional oil and gas market doesn't match the uptick of the new energy market, because we do not have enough policy certainty to fill the gap. And for nation states, governments, supply chain, we need to make sure that we look after the engineering competence of our workers and redeploy them rapidly at scale on hydrogen and CCUS, which I believe will be on the earlier end of that transition curve. But that only happens if we have investable projects, which is probably obvious, but I thought I would restate it.
Indeed, yes. And I think that's what we need to be seeing around the world. And this brings me, Tim, if I may bring you in here. When we look at, you know, different regional variations too, and I know it's one thing that I've spoken with many of your colleagues here with Siemens Energy as well, in terms of that concept of the way you roll out projects, the regionalization in many ways. There's a need, you would say, for more of a tailored solution. You know, it has to be modernization of existing infrastructure in one sense, but also focusing on innovations. What do you decide? How do you decide it? And how do you look around the world in terms of how you actually choose the next projects and what to do?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, of course, there's always, you look at the number of projects, and since we have a balanced portfolio, it's important that we also look at how can we help the transition on the existing asset base. I mean, if you look, 1/6 of the global, energy generation is done with our equipment. And a lot of customers like Andreas, they build a plan with a lifetime of 40 years, and that's how their, economic equation is. So how do we keep that plant, economic, but also, help reduce, the emissions, the CO2. So that's really when we look at it, what can we offer? I mean, is it, upgrades that reduce it, extend it until end of life, or until it's no longer feasible to operate the plant? Renewable will play a huge role, but it's intermittent, right? We need the backup. And how do we have really sustainable backup solutions? We talked, about burning hydrogen in gas turbines. It's possible now, but I mean, it's, up to 60% large scale. We gradually have with technology to go up to that 100% and, on existing older technology. So for us, it's all about the balance. And, we spend about €1 billion each year on R&D. And what we have seen now in the last year and also this year's, R&D allocation process, a lot more is shifting to providing those solutions, both on the innovation front for new installed capacity, but also more and more shifting into helping existing plants and looking at also solutions. How do we modify plants to get there? And it's, as we said in the beginning, step by step, we want to make the big steps and see what's feasible, but it has to be, also on a technology front, has to be feasible. And, that's part of the equation, how we look at it and how we drive it.
Luis, when we look at, what Tim is talking about there in terms of R&D allocation, and indeed for you, maybe capital allocation, looking at the metrics around this entire focus, the reduction of carbon intensity, something that I know if you read about Repsol, this is a phrase that comes up time and time again here. But how do you actually make sense of it in terms of the metrics and objectives and, explain this to the wider publics?
Well, this is at the center of a public debate and debate with stakeholders and with investors today, how we measure decarbonization, how we measure the reduction of CO2 emission. There are a lot of groups now working on methodologies on doing that. But what we need to be clear is that first we need relevant metrics that represents how your company, in our case, Repsol, is moving from, let's say, a certain level of carbon emissions to a new level, lower of carbon emissions. There is difficult to set a single methodology that applies for everyone. So we may recognize some differences. What is important is that we explain very clearly and translate into simple messages what we are doing and what is the impact on the carbon emissions. Other story is that investors need to compare the relative merits of one company versus the other. And we may agree on methodologies that, okay, under a certain metrics, we may compare one company versus the other, but certain companies may decide to apply their own metrics in order to decarbonize. Just put in an example, because this is very theoretical. We measure the carbon intensity, which is the emissions of CO2 per unit of energy that we put available to society. And we incorporate all the emissions that are associated to the use of our products. But we say, okay, which are our products? Our products are the ones that are obtained from our primary energy, oil and gas that today we produce. This is our methodology. Others measure in a different way. But first, comparability is important. We need to provide information for whoever wants to compare under any metric, they can do it. So transparency, good reporting, and explaining the metrics you are using and which is the contribution to decarbonization. So I believe that in this way, we are finding a very good element of dialogue with our ESG investors. Repsol has some 35% of investors that declare themselves as ESG driven. And I believe that they feel comfortable with our approach.
We have a few questions coming in from our audience. Thank you so much. And we still have about 16 minutes left. So continue to get some of those questions in. Andreas, if I can, we have a few questions, quite a few following up on hydrogen. So one here for you in terms of lots of talk about hydrogen. It's an obvious option for the net zero equation because of its applicability to oil and gas, but isn't there some risk to be had by placing maybe too much of a bet on it? And what about, and we have talked about some of this other areas like energy efficiency, yes, this has been addressed, and CCUS. What does a balanced de-risked net zero portfolio actually look like? Andreas, can you take that one?
I think it's a rather complicated question because we all strive for having a de-risking portfolio and being net zero. And I think it's not the intention to doing that or not to doing that. That's out of question. We all want to do it. The question is how fast we are doing it and how we are balancing income and profits, let's name it, and our strive for sustainability, because we have shareholders, we have environment, we have stakeholders, we have employees, and of course we have to afford to finance that transition because it's not coming for free. Otherwise it would be a no-brainer. So for us, I think it's really the task to really balance it, showing a way which is sellable, which is explainable. As Luis explained it, we have shareholders as well, which are looking at ESG targets and how we do that. And I think it has to be a credible way. Giving out a task to be CO2 neutral in 2060 or 50 or 70 is probably okay, but nobody can grasp it. We cannot grasp it. I will probably not remember what I have said in 2021 if you ask me in 2050. Having tangible steps you can measure some stretch following up, which are able to communicate to the share market, to the shareholders, to the employees, to the society, and being credible in that. And on the other hand, showing as well the complexity and the gigantic task what we are doing, I think that's the right way. Just to remind you, Germany is importing at the moment 70% of the primary energy. I think we don't have enough wind and sun in Germany to be self-sufficient. And if we are closing the lignite mines, it will be 83% what we are importing. And then, of course, the question is how we want to do that. And I think there's too much misperception about how much energy we are using it, how we can change it, what is possible and which amount of time and what is not possible.
John, I see you agreeing here. Do you want to come in on this topic? Do you want to weigh in on it for us?
Yeah, in small part. You know, they say the journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. And on the topic of KPIs and monitoring, I strongly agree with the previous speakers who said, look, the thing for me, number one, genuinely commit to the transition. Number two, figure out how you're going to measure yourself. There's 10 different ways. Different companies have different shapes and there's different, you know, applicabilities of metrics, but genuinely measure yourself with the absolute intent of getting better. And then just start doing things, you know. Again, apologies for keeping this at the simple end, but
no, but this is what we need, I think, sometimes. Yeah, we overthink it, I think, sometimes. We get caught up in you know, the complexity that sometimes we just think is there, but it's about making that first step. Yes.
Yeah, and you know, when we've been at this in 20 years, maybe we'll be getting really finesse decisions about the relativity of green hydrogen versus direct air capture or something. But right now, there's so much that we can go after. Our own strategy work has indicated, as everyone knows, that there's a sort of maturity profile for each of these technologies. There is no one that you can bet the ranch on that's going to be dominant, because it's an energy mix that, you know, applies differently to different countries, companies, situations. You need to do it all in different proportions, and you need to have the flexibility and willingness to do that. And it's clear, you know, back to where I started, there are 101 things we could be doing now as a society more than we are, and I would focus on those rather than, you know, an end state technology mix in 2050, which I hope to be well retired by then.
And it's so true. I don't think we have the luxury of, you know, sitting around talking about it for much longer. There is, I think, an urgency that we really have to do a lot, because we have to actually make sure that we reach those objections and we reach those targets. And I think we probably, the time for talking is over. Take those steps and do it. Also, Shinichi, I have a follow-up question for you, particularly here, in terms of, as much of the potential is really in the industrial scale decarbonization. You know, how will a country like Japan best support hydrogen's growth from that fantastic energy alternative to a transformative decarbonization solution? So, and again, I think, you know, in terms of your Ministry of Economy, Trade, Industry, to, you know, we look at, you know, the industrial scale decarbonization that actually has to happen.
Yes. Yes, the scaling up and introducing this the decarbonization in big scale is very important. But the thing is that I think people talked about, previous speakers talked about step-by-step approach, and we think realistic energy transition is very important. When we talk about these policies, there's a hard debate between these realistic transition versus leapfrog, jump to the best technology. But just like Tim said in the previous talk about step-by-step, yes, there is realistic approach. And this is particularly important, of course, for Japan, but in case of developing countries, this approach is very important. Most developing countries, okay, we can go for the best technology, yes, but you must think from the standpoint of developing countries. In reality, for many these countries, climate change is still the enemy to their economic prosperity. Installing maximum amount of renewable energy is not enough to fill their surging energy demand. And also energy access has to be improved, and switching coal right into renewable is not as easy as it sounds. So country needs to rely some portion on fossil fuel for a certain period of time. And each country builds energy strategy and priority based on their own condition, including indigenous energy source, cost of energy option, industry structure, stage of energy development, etc. So for developing countries, energy transition requires stable energy supply in an affordable manner. So in order to achieve carbon neutrality globally, we need to reframe it as a growth strategy, and we need to provide pragmatic solution of realistic energy transition. So instead of pushing developing country to leapfrog or jump off the cliff, just pushing immediately from coal to renewable, taking step-by-step approach is important. So the blend, there might be some blend, renewable energy, energy efficiency, switching coal to gas power, hydrogen, starting from gas plus hydrogen mixed thermal, or coal plus ammonia mixed thermal, or SMR. These may provide secure energy supply in a cost-saving manner. So we want to make sure that all of above approach is available for all countries, and each country has its own choice of path to reach their own sustainable goal. We are aware that the area, Economic Research Institute of ASEAN and East Asia, is now working on such realistic energy transition model, developing realistic transition scenario by country, by each country of the ASEAN 10 countries. So we support this approach and believe that this same approach is applicable to many countries, improving developing countries, and perhaps for some developed countries, and also producer countries and consumer countries. So this is my this is what we are now discussing in Japan.
Yes, indeed. And then again, this, this is a conversation that will change and will continue to evolve, because yes, so much I think is changing at the moment, and it's a very dynamic time in everybody's, I think, position when it comes to that energy transition. We're going to begin wrapping up here, and I'd like to get maybe your thoughts and your maybe call to action, those words of wisdom, those words of warning, perhaps, that you might want to put out there. And Louis, if I could start with you and maybe put this into context as well around the, global governance and country policies that are going to have an impact as well, and how, does a company like Repsol, work within that? I mean, what's your message out there to the policyholders?
Yeah, here policies and regulations are of key importance. It's going to be one of the key drivers of the pace of decarbonization and the pace of the energy transition. So for me, the question is that let's speak about price of carbon. At the end of the day, decarbonization costs money, and you need to internalize this cost along the value chain, and eventually the consumer has to pay a little bit more for an energy which is decarbonized. How do you do that? And we are discussing that the ideal world would be, let's say, having a global single carbon price. This will take a lot of time. Global governance is something we are missing, but in between we need to be pragmatic again. And there will be regional and sectorial ways of regulating, let's say, and internalizing the price of carbon. For me, the single message is, let's focus the regulation on the real target. First, reducing CO2 emissions, not to be very deterministic on which technologies are to be used and are to be promoted. Put the right incentives to real decarbonization and carbon emissions, and the same as other speakers stressed, balance the short and long term. The long-term view and the long-term vision is important, is key to illuminate the policies. But the short-term measures, how we need to decarbonize the energy mix today, is something that needs to be addressed by the regulations. So collaboration, real focus on CO2 emissions, balancing short and long term, and being technology neutral is something that could illuminate very well the development of policies that by necessity will be sectorial and regional for a while.
John, talk to me about, you talk about engaging your people, engaging employees, and really bringing everybody on board, because otherwise it's not going to happen. How do you think that's so important in terms of moving this forward with the speed that it needs?
Look, almost all companies are determined by their employees. And we talk a lot about projects and companies needing to be investable, but we also need an employment proposition that fuels our company so we get the best, brightest brains. And it's a fact of life that some of us have a long and, I would say, proud fossil fuel past, and we shouldn't be guilty or ashamed of that. When was the last time we talked about energy poverty? We've done great things for the world in delivering their needs in the past. I think we've got a pragmatic present and frankly, a fantastic future. And in that, we need to engage our employees. They've got tons to offer. It is one of the most motivating things we find when we're hiring people. They really want to be part of this. And I would urge everybody, for want of a short answer, let's not forget our employees. They drive our companies. This is an incredibly positive thing for them. They're brimming with ideas about things that we probably don't know. Let's use them, let's harness them. And it's just a fantastic virtuous circle is what I believe in short.
Shinichi, if I can just get a closing word from you in terms of technology heading on. You've mentioned a lot of it, but do you really believe it is about looking at that diverse mix of technology to make sure that you get the right one when the time is needed? What do you think?
Yes, thank you. Talking about technology, of course, I didn't have time to really talk about the ammonia as a fuel. This is another form of transporting hydrogen. We just have a MOC between UAE and Japan of this demonstration plan for developing ammonium fuel and carbon recycling. But other than that, yes, building predictability by providing realistic energy transition is the key for this making the vision into reality. This is my message. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Tim, I've heard you say in the past too, policy can't outpace technology. And obviously we look at Siemens Energy and we look at the fact that you've broken away to become, a very sort of focused standalone company, but also there's many, many stakeholders involved. And really you have to spend time to make sure that everybody is on board the way we all head towards, the future that we need.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it's really critical that we act now to protect the climate, while at the same time we need to meet the growing energy demand. And, net zero is desirable and feasible. But again, going back to my initial statement, it's going to be step by step. Renewables, have limitations, intermittent, storage isn't there where it is. So, as a consequence, we have to accept that, fossil fuel powered plants are going to be there for the interim. And, that's one reality we have to accept. But at the same time, we shouldn't get too comfortable with it. I mean, it's, the long-term goal is net zero. And for that transition, we need to provide the best solution to get there and to minimize. And as John said, there's plenty of solutions there that we can implement now. And the mix is going to be crucial for the transition journey to get there.
Indeed, yes. I think there's so many different elements that we all really have to take care of. I, want to thank you all for putting all your time and effort into it there in terms of really bringing all those great ideas to bear, what we are doing, what we can do, what we need to do. But I think if we learn nothing out of this too, it's about just get on with it, take those practical steps, start doing it. Many of the companies, we heard some of your great stories in terms of what you have in place. And I just love that refreshing ideas about the fact that perhaps we overthink things too many times and it can be a little bit complicated, whereby we should just make the move that needs to be made, because I think we're certainly all heading in the right direction and we all need to get there. I want to thank you all for being with us. Luis Cabra from Repsol, Tim Holt from Siemens, Shinichi KIHARA from Japan. Thank you so much for being with us, John Pearson. And Andreas, we lost you there briefly, but you're here to say goodbye to us. So thank you for being with us and thanks for coming back. We have to wrap it up there because our time is, and I really want to thank you for net zero pledges from vision to reality. A great conversation there. Thank you all so much, every one of you. We're going to move on to our next session now, and obviously a lot to look forward to throughout the day. We have so much happening here at the Atlantic Council. We have sessions right throughout the day and sessions coming from you know, all over the world really, and from all of our great experts who are going to share their knowledge with us. We have, of course, all of our audience out there. Please stay engaged. Make sure you get your questions in there and get your comments in there.